Who are you, United Nations, whatever you are, who are you to give my land away to these European settlers?
Okay, you claim to be the protector of human rights. Well, look what's happening in Palestine. This violation has taken place. What are you gonna do about it?
It's unfair to ask someone whether they would go back or not. I mean, everyone expects anyone from a Palestinian background to be like, oh yeah, yes, in a heartbeat I would return.
It made me a little emotional as well, that I don't know what my land looks like.
And instead, you know what Birmingham looks like.
My name is Sarah. I'm from Al Khalil and Bethlehem.
My name is Dania and I'm from Jerusalem.
My name is Mustafa and I'm from Al Khalil.
And my name is Faris and I am from Al Khalil and Bir Saba, and today we're discussing a plethora of different topics, including international law, Palestinian identity, and the return to Palestine. Please enjoy. So, Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala ahlihi wa sahbihi wa ala. Is that how I started last time as well? Oh. Well, I'm sure you guys know about UN resolutions. One for me that comes to mind when starting a discussion like this is Resolution 181. Now, I'm a bit of a layman, so I'm not sure how these UN resolutions kind of factor into international law, right? But Resolution 181 is the 1947 partition plan of Palestine, giving over 50% of Palestine to the European Jews that settled with the help of the British Empire. Now, to my eyes, that's completely unjust. Who are you, United Nations, whatever you are, who are you to give my land away to these European settlers? So if that's like kind of one of the first decisions made by the United Nations, which is synonymous with international law, how can I, as a Palestinian, look at international law and see it as anything but a farce, a con, a lie? That's really kind of the main point I want to start with, is I don't believe that international law actually helps Palestinians, and it's not that it's failed Palestinians, but rather it was set up to protect the interests of the empire.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I think for that argument, a lot of people would use the term or the phrase, the master's tools cannot destroy the master's house, in that sense. But I think what people fail to understand is that the way we use international law in today's world is not as the ultimate end to achieve something. It's a tool that we can use in order to achieve some of the goals or the things that we want to achieve. And I think the main thing that Palestinians are looking to achieve would be accountability at this level. And I don't think it's something or a tool that can be used solely. I think it's one of the many tools that are available in today's world and for Palestinians. Yes, I agree with you. Maybe international law was unjust in its creation or in some of the resolutions that it came up with. But it's the goal that international law started with, and it's the aspirations that it had. And, looking at how it was formulated in the aftermath of World War I and World War II, it was to protect the people and to ensure that the war crimes and the crimes against humanity that were committed on large scale would not be repeated again for people. I think that's the main purpose that it came with. So when we look at international law in today's world, yes, some might say it's a colonial construct, it's a colonial tool, but it's actually the way that you use something, and it's one of the things that we have access to and people can work within. So it's the way you use it and how you use it. I personally have never thought that I would be hearing about 1948 in an international court, until the South Africa's application for provisional measures in the case against Israel and genocide, where the entire case was started from 1948, and Israel's policies back then were actually brought up before an international court, considering that Palestine is always spoken about since 1967, and that's the starting point usually for people, and they disregard the entirety of what has happened in 1948 and actually before that. So I think it's a matter of how you use something and how you employ that tool, and then you start from there. But also it's an acknowledgement that this is not one thing on its own that can be used, but with other tools and, for me as a lawyer, with other laws around the world and solidarity between people and national movements and everything, it can achieve maybe one aspect of something that we would like to achieve. And I think I'll leave it to others now. So,
No, I think I'd agree also in that the concepts that you're talking about, preventing crimes against humanity and genocide and war crimes, these principles are obviously like essential and things that we need in the world. And then it comes back to me that I agree that we failed at least to hold accountable maybe some Western states specifically, or generally some states around the world to these standards. But I think we go back to the concept of the rule of law, and I think that's where we're moving to in terms of where we are with international law. I think we're moving in that direction. I'm not saying it's very quick. I think the law is a very, very, very slow machine, but it moves nonetheless. And I think we are moving to a point where we're getting towards somewhere where the rule of law being the concept of everybody is equally liable under the law, or equally accountable to the law. Sorry, and yeah. So I think moving in that direction. I agree that in the beginning the concepts were great. Maybe the accountability wasn't there, but I do feel that we're moving in that direction. Which is
I don't think that we're moving towards rule of law. I actually think we're moving away from rule of law. We've seen over the last 18 or so months Israel kill, maim, torture, rape with complete impunity, right? There's been provisional measures by the ICJ, and there's a arrest warrant out for Netanyahu and Gallant, but it hasn't stopped anyone. And if anything, this is telling other actors around the world, okay, if the Israelis can do it, why can't I do it? The Russians are looking at it, okay, if the Israelis can do it, why can't I do it? The Chinese, maybe they're looking at Taiwan, they're thinking, the Israelis can do it. So.
Allow me to say something. On the opening sentence or the opening paragraph, let's say, that you've mentioned on why should I believe in international law, etc., look what's happening around me. It reminded me of an argument I actually had, or rather much a conversation I had with a friend of mine. For the sake of this podcast, let's call him Adonis. Okay. So I was sitting with Adonis, and we were discussing what's taking place in Palestine, etc., and the whole injustice. And then I was talking about trying to promote and protect the rights of Palestinians, or advancing the rights of Palestinians using the language of the law. And he's like, he just rolled his eyes. He's like, what are you on about? We did not have a say in the laws that have been formulated, the modern laws, at least 20th century, etc. We did not have a say in how to apply it, or the debate that has gone around it, in a sense. We didn't have a say in any of that. So why should the laws now be applied to me and not applied to me at the same time? And then I sat there for a bit, and then I'm like, okay, let's be realistic here. In essence, the question of, has international law failed Palestinians? This question, in a sense, is, in its premise, I think, faulty. Okay, because of one very important reason, and that's, if we expect international law to fail a group, that means we in return have expected it to emancipate this group, right? And in reality, if we look historically at how laws have come to be, if we are to speak about the Hague Regulations, if we are to speak about the Geneva Conventions and whatnot, if we are to speak about all these laws, we as a community, as Palestinians, as Arabs, etc., we weren't on the table deciding whether these laws should be formulated, how they should be formulated, etc. But they're there. And in theory, they look great. I mean, who doesn't want human rights? Who doesn't want equality? Who doesn't want the prohibition of attacks against civilians indiscriminately? Who doesn't want all these things? We all want that. In theory, it looks great. But let's come to practice, and let's be realistic here. In practice, if I understand and I know that the law was not created by me to emancipate me, but it was there created by a state, by certain states, to emancipate certain states or people of a certain state, then how can I use the law to my benefit? This is the way I look at things, because I'm not a lawyer. I did not come into this world saying, yes, I want justice for all. I'm a journalist. I'm cynical of everything, okay? And so I asked myself, I'm like, okay, how can I use the law to my benefit? And here it's people might say it's to advance the rule of law. It's by using the language of the law to promote and protect people, and that's great. And I believe that this is happening, and slowly. But there's another side to things too that I've been contemplating recently, even, and that's if this law is created by a certain state, and the state pretends or claims to be the beacon of human rights, the beacon of humanity, etc. And some states actually go far away, even farther, to say, we want to promote it in other states. We want to protect it in other states. Bush doctrine, okay? Some states do say that, and we've seen it, global powers. But then, okay, they say that, and how can I use this law to actually unmask them? You slowly unmask them using these laws by saying, okay, you claim to be the protector of human rights. Well, look what's happening in Palestine. Look at what's happening on the ground. This violation has taken place. This violation has taken place. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to hold these violators accountable? And this is when politics comes in, and everyone's a bit like shaky and a bit hesitant to take action. And when they're hesitant, you unmask this face that they've got going on. And when you unmask them, you do not unmask them just to show the people, yes, well, this person is claiming to promote and protect human rights and to be the beacon of humanity, but is not doing so. No, you're not doing it for that. It's because they won't listen to you, but they should listen to their people, because their people can hold them accountable. I, as a Palestinian, cannot hold the West accountable because they won't listen to me, but they will listen to their people because they're forced to listen to their people using their own laws. So this is how I view it. It's mainly very systematic, and it's mainly about unmasking and advancing. So,
well, why hasn't it led people to put their governments to the test, or keep their governments accountable? For example, in the US, many polls have shown upwards of 60% of voters do not support the genocide, and yet the US is the biggest backer of the genocide. It's a US genocide by all.
I don't agree that people haven't tried to put their governments to account. I think in the UK we had many movements that attempted to show politicians what it is that we how we feel about the genocide. And then there were a few successful candidates in the last elections. I think it was 3 or 4 MPs. Independent MPs that won over Labour MPs. Labour was expecting already after 14 years of Tory rule. They knew that they were going to win, and so they were expecting to win by a landslide, and they won quite a huge majority. But yeah, there were I think 3 or 4 examples of independent MPs who ran on the fact that we're against this genocide and we're against the UK's part in this genocide, and they were successful, especially the lines that the leadership of Labour, the Labour Party, have taken. And I think we've also there were also very near misses as well as the 3 successful. I think Britain as a whole, we have shown the government what we want, and I think there were one of the things. I mean, I'm not going to say we're extremely ecstatic by everything that the government has done since, but there was some movement in terms of banning some of the arms, the licenses, 8%. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying I think had the movements in the UK not done that, we wouldn't have got that 8%. And the line that the government has taken wouldn't have changed in the way that it has. And I think in the US they also attempted something similar. I think it's a lot more difficult. I think the way that the politics works over there is a lot more focused on the super PACs and the different kinds of lobbies that exist there, and I think it's a lot more. It's a much more difficult terrain than the UK, and people are far more removed than their local MPs as well. So I think in the UK, just the systems are slightly different. But I do think that people have attempted to do that, and I think and you can see it. And we are focusing, of course, on the larger states because they have such the greatest input into the genocide that's happening at the moment. But there's other states around the world as well where the people have spoken and the governments respond.
So we're at a stage now where the genocide has been ongoing with a brief pause a month ago for around 18 months. And it doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon. And you spoke about how international law is a tool that can be utilized. So for us living in the West, Palestinians or not, where does that leave us? What are the best ways for us to use this tool for us to kind of attempt to stop the ongoing massacres?
You know, in my practice and my work, there is one thing that we've realized over the past 18 months, and it's that there are a lot of international laws that have actually been adopted into domestic legislation in the UK. And then when you come and start using them in your letters, in your arguments, you know, when we write to universities telling them, oh, you cannot be investing in illegal Israeli settlements, or, you know, you cannot be funding Israeli military, or you should not be, doing 1, 2, 3. They respond to us saying, oh, there's no definitive legal ruling in the UK that tells us we cannot. I mean, yes, this is something that's been adapted into the law, but apparently there's not been a utilization of the international laws that have been incorporated into domestic jurisdictions. And I think that's one thing that we can go from, and that's one thing, you know, we should be working with, which is to use these domestic laws that are here, and instead of just waiting for the ICC or the ICJ, start taking legal action within the country, within the jurisdictions. So within the UK, within the US, on different things. Yani, it doesn't have to be, big things, but small victories sometimes are compiled together. And I think just wanted to comment on things that Mustafa and Sarah have said. I do agree with Sarah that international law is a way to unmask the hypocrisy of other states and how they're acting. And I do also agree with Mustafa that there's been concerted efforts and actions and solidarity from people, either through student movements, either through different legal groups working on different legal challenges against, the arms trade, submitting complaints against specific individuals that were complicit in crimes abroad. But I also think it's important for us to understand when we're discussing this that, and following on the point that you said, that people often do not vote on the basis of foreign policy. This is not one of the bases for people to vote on. That is one of the considerations that might be relevant to a specific generation or a specific type of people that identify in a specific way, far left, or people who care and champion for human rights. But I've had a lot of conversations with people who don't work in international law, probably doctors, we're talking people who work in finance. And yes, some of these people do care about Palestine and other issues, amongst them Syria, Yemen, Sudan, all of that. But a lot of the people have said to me, and specifically I have some American friends, we vote on the basis of economy, which government or which candidate gives us the best economy, gives me access to more money. So that is, when we're discussing these things, it's important to understand what we're expecting out of something and what can be accomplished through something. And it's important not to put too much weight on foreign policy as a factor that makes a determination when it comes to voting, but also very important to acknowledge all the efforts that people have done. I mean, the weekly protests in the UK, people, the brutal policing that some people had to witness in so many occasions. You have to give it to people that they have actually put effort in, week in, every week, all these mass protests that have been happening in the UK. The students that were protesting for months, that had to undergo, violent policing, civil injunctions and legal threats by the university, sometimes disciplinary actions. The lawyers that put their lives on the front, and this has been the only thing they've been working on for 18 months. And possibly this is one of the most difficult fields to work in as a lawyer, I have to say. It's not only frustrating, but it puts you as a person and puts your character on the line for criticism and threats from other groups as well. So I do think, it's about balancing these views and just understanding how much you can expect from something.
But Dania, on the foreign policy point, yes, we do not expect, it's not really the norm where people are going to vote vote for a certain entity or against a certain entity because of their actions outside in other states. But we cannot split foreign policy from also domestic effects, because when these countries are complicit, when they aid and abet, they're sending cash, they're sending money, they're sending human capital, basically. And all of this money, human capital, human workforce power, meaning, is coming from their own very own states. So when these people of these states, let's suppose whether it's, I don't know, for instance, let's say the US, when the American says, well, I don't want my money spent on weaponry outside in foreign nations. I want this money spent internally on my internal domestic affairs. This is one side of things, yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to be, there's no split between foreign policy and domestic affairs. So that's a thing. And on the point, I think you've discussed universities, and it's quite important. If we are to say, what should people do? Okay, who are these people? Are we talking about people who have a 9-to-5 job, who have nothing to do with foreign policy affairs or law, international law, etc.? What can they do? What they can do is educate themselves. That's one. Educate others around them. That's two. Engage in whatever means they have available to them as citizens of the country, given to them by the state. For instance, like writing to your MPs, by pushing them to answer questions on certain matters that are important to you. The protests, when they're going on peaceful protests in the streets on a weekly basis, demanding that their government stops this complicity, demanding that they do something about this genocide. This is important. This is not less important than someone standing in a court of law. It's not less important than someone in a battlefield telling you what's happening on the ground. It is actually as important, if not more, because change comes from there, I believe, as it should be, and as it does also from other avenues, like the legal avenue, like the public affairs, policy avenue, etc. So for the general public, this is what people can do. For people within the field of law, and this is something Dania has said, fighting on within the legal avenues, within their jurisdictions, within their countries, within their laws. And I think this is where Global 195 comes in, right? So basically, Global 195 is a coalition that we've got started at ICJP, and it's a coalition of lawyers, it's a coalition of lawyers primarily. So what these lawyers do is that they file complaints against war criminals, and human rights abusers, who have been complicit in crimes against humanity, war crimes in Gaza. And they file these complaints within their jurisdictions, in their countries, demanding that their states hold accountable these people if they ever land in their countries, or if they already are there. So this is something that lawyers are doing, can do, and they can do it through Global 195, through projects like that, and many other projects that are taking place.
And also, just one thing, which I really like about Global 195 as a project is it's creative. Like it's not like it's a pre-existing idea or way of doing things, but it's a bunch of lawyers who sat down and thought about what is it, how can we use our industry or what we have access to in our industry to create accountability or to move things, right? And I think everybody from all industries really should try and look at their tools and see what they've got, and they know their industries better. So whether you're, I don't know whether you're. It's difficult, really, but I'm just putting out there engineers, doctors.
We've seen doctors.
Yeah, what doctors
have done.
Exactly, yeah, going out to Gaza and you know all the support, all the support that they've shown, and also just bringing. It's difficult, like when you have a doctor on the ground in Gaza and they're telling you and they're videoing and showing you what they've seen. You can't negate their expertise there, you know what I mean? And everybody has expertise that they've got and their tools, and it's about everybody to sit down and maybe with some of your peers and think about how can we creatively find not necessarily a solution, but find creative ways to use our industry to better help alleviate what's happening.
Has anything come of Global 195 so far, or is it still starting up?
Yeah, we have lots of states lots of lawyers within different states who have already started the work, who have already filed such complaints in their jurisdictions. And we've got lots of people coming to us asking how can they help, how can they be on board, how can they do that in their very own states. And with the law, I think Mustafa, you've mentioned it, it's rather slow, it takes time. But the fact that we are applying pressure within different jurisdictions, within different states, makes the law enforcement agencies see that, oh, this is not something that's just been filed in our state, in our jurisdiction, in our country. This is filed in many other countries, which means if I don't do something about this, then what's going to happen to me? What's going to come to me, basically, in return? Am I going to be questioned for not doing my job or not investigating?
So peer pressure.
Yes, pressure.
Yeah. The Global 195 reminds me of, there was a recent filing of a court something. I don't know the terminology, but there was 10 Israelis being pursued, or British Israelis, for their war crimes in Gaza. And before that, there's also the Hind Rajab Foundation, based in The Hague, I think, and they've gone after people. And I know the Hind Rajab Foundation people, they've come under fire by the Zionists, like, quite heavily. And it kind of brings up what you were saying earlier about you putting yourself at risk when you're doing this kind of work, because you obviously, as a lawyer, you've got to be like at the forefront of things. And so I don't know what my question was, but it's the work is being done, I'm guessing. And in regards to the stuff that's being done with the Hind Rajab Foundation and the 10 British Israelis, are you guys involved in any of that? Do you guys know much about what's happened there?
I wouldn't say we're directly involved or working with them. I do, we have met with them. We do know of the work that is being done. There's some sort of coordination in knowing what other groups are going to be doing. But I do think that it's also important to keep each group working on its own at some point, and that that keeps different and separate streamlines of work happening, while making sure that no one is repeating other people's work or replicating other work that has been done. But it creates these different points of pressure on governments and on different law enforcement agencies. So I think what the Hind Rajab Foundation has done was very important, was very widespread, and all of that, very important effort. But also, I think what you were referring to was the complaint against 10 British nationals who served in the IDF that was brought by PILK and PCHR, led by Raja Sourani. And yes, it's a legal complaint to, I think, the law enforcement agency in the UK, something that ICGP has done similar work to in the past as well, but against British ministers, in fact. But I do think it's important to sometimes coordinate, but also at the same time keep some separate streamlines of work. So there are different pressure points, as I said before.
That complaint reminds me of one individual, and I'm sure you guys think the same thing, who is, remind me of your name.
Tell me what you're talking about.
That's a good start.
The Bengali person who she was 15 years old and she went to...
Oh, Shamima Begum.
Shamima Begum, that's it. Right, so she was groomed by groomers, and actually it was Canadian intelligence who got her to Syria. She joined ISIS for a while, then she left, she tried to come back, and they took her citizenship away. And ostensibly she hasn't done anything apart from me moving there. And I don't know, she had children, I'm assuming. But she didn't do anything, she didn't commit any war crimes. And you have these Israelis with British nationality who go there to Gaza, they commit heinous war crimes, they film themselves dressed in women's underwear, whatever else they do, they play with the toys of Palestinian children they've beheaded previously with their F-35s, and they can come back here and it's all fine. And this has happened as earlier as well. There was that the chaplain at a university up north somewhere. He was a university chaplain, and he went to Israel and he was like supporting the genocide early on. And he came back, and obviously there was a campaign against him by students and whatnot. And then apparently he was the victim now, even though he participated in a genocide. Really, it only leads me to believe.
I think
it's racism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, legally speaking, you run into the issue of what organizations or what things are prescribed and not. So when I don't know exactly I don't know the details of Shamima Begum's case, but in going to join an international group, ISIS or ISIL, she's essentially joined a terrorist group, and that is a crime in the UK.
But killing children, Palestinian children, is not a crime.
I think two different legal bases or two different cases that you cannot draw an analogy between, and that's very important. But I do understand where you're coming from, and honestly, I think for me, and sometimes as a Palestinian walking around the streets of London, I'm like, is there anyone around me that went to Palestine, killed people, and is walking freely on the streets amongst us? It's a big concern. And I do think, you've mentioned the case that the guy felt like he was the victim and he turned out to be the victim. But I think the world order is changing. I think now we're seeing people who join the IDF trying to hide these details, trying to turn their profiles into private. They're feeling the pressure. They're feeling the threat. They realize that what they're doing isn't acceptable in the eyes of people in different societies and different countries. So even if the government isn't actually doing or taking any concrete action about it, they know that within the communities that they're going to go back to and live within, the order of things is changing. Some committing crimes, killing children, participating in a genocide, and glorifying these kind of actions that you're taking abroad is no longer acceptable, and that is why they're feeling, afraid of sharing their details online, and they're trying to go more onto the private side.
And there's this thing. This is where politics comes in play, right? And we won't dwell into politics a lot because then this conversation will never end. But for instance, with France, okay, and I'm quite certain that this is the case, but in France, there is an agreement between Israel and France for the French nationals, French citizens, to be able to basically be part of the IDF. They're allowed to do that by law, okay? In the UK, this is not okay, right, Dania?
Yes.
Yeah, this is not okay. So I'm clear and right on that one. So this is not okay. So politics does play a role.
It's not okay being a very legal term that we use often in the
this is not okay. But since we're not in the office, I get to say this is not okay, right? Okay. So this is illegal. Okay. And given that this is illegal, what some people expected is like, okay, I'll do that. I'll go join the IDF and then come back. And then who's going to hold me accountable? And that's when people said, no, we don't like that. We do not accept the fact that you violated the laws of the country to go and basically commit violations in another country. We do not accept that. When people did not accept that, voiced this out, when we had organizations who are basically leading the forefront of finding these people, finding their identities and actually holding them accountable using the language of the law and in courts. And this is when people started, they started thinking twice. They're like, okay, now I need to take care. And when they started saying, okay, now I needed to take care, know that this is when you started actually succeeding. This is when you've actually taken this a step further or step forward. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, and we've seen it in action. We've seen, some events of people who were in the IDF coming to speak in London. They wouldn't really put the address of where the event is taking place because they're worried of what other groups might do, or people who find that unacceptable, or even some other events where there was fundraising for the IDF happening and the venue wasn't shown, like where the fundraising was happening or what was happening. So yes, you are seeing people trying to be cautious about these, being too public about these kind of things.
Yeah, you remind me of the new Zionist propaganda ad that's been circulating around, which is the one where these two Israelis, they're going to holiday to a European country, and they're hiding the fact that they're Israelis. And I spoke about this to comedian Sandeep the other day. It's completely outrageous how out of touch they are with reality. But it also brings me to a point that you made earlier about the fact that people don't vote on foreign policy. I know it doesn't seem connected, but it is, I promise. They don't vote on foreign policy, they vote on domestic issues. And the Zionist propaganda that's been pumped out over the last 18 months is that the Zionist entity, State of Israel, is the bastion of Western civilization. And it's a kind of a wall protecting the Western world from Islamist barbarianism. And that's kind of the way they're trying to penetrate into the domestic psyche of the American or the British or the European voter, is they are trying to say that if it doesn't happen, if you allow if you allow us to go down, if you don't support us fully, if you don't allow us to wipe out Palestinians, you're next. And it kind of goes to show how they're trying to affect things from the inside and how desperate they are to get the approval to commit genocide against the Palestinian people. I forgot where I was going with that, but
I think that's an interesting point. But I wonder how successful they've been. I don't know if you guys. What I found interesting in the political discourse, especially in the U.S. For the last election cycle, especially with the right wing. And I mean, obviously, Trump, he played this up as one of the things they used in his populist rhetoric is the idea of isolationism a little bit, which is like, we're not going to send they don't want to send any more money to the Ukraine, or they want to get rid of the amount the ties that they have to Europe. They feel like they're funding Europe. The same thing with I think in part what's been parceled into that as well a little bit, at least on a public or a popular level, has been Israel, the funding of Israel as well. So I think you're right. I think maybe they've been trying to do that, but I wonder how successful they've been in doing that. I think largely, well, it seems to me at least from the outside, that the US public have been feeling like we're really struggling here in the US. Let's stop sending money to everybody, regardless, Israel, Europe, Russia, Ukraine, all of that kind of thing. So I think it's interesting.
I think there's a recent poll actually that came out that showed for the first time ever, majority of the US, or rather more US citizens view Israel unfavorably than those who do. It's like the first time ever, and obviously in large part to Israeli actions in Palestine. But it also brings to question, how the Americans see themselves, because what's going on in Palestine is a product of American empire, right? And this is not the first time the Americans have committed heinous crimes in the name of defending their geopolitical posturing, right? So they've previously, more recently in Iraq in the early 2000s, they killed upwards of 1 million or whatever it was, heinous amount of crimes committed. But in the eyes of the world, what Israel is doing is apparently more heinous. I don't know, it feels like there's a bit of a disconnect there. How come the Americans, okay, maybe individuals got prosecuted. I had a conversation with Tayyip about this recently as well. But the kind of the those on the ground may have got prosecuted, some of them, but those at the top, they've been completely left to do what they want. Tony Blair was Middle East peace envoy, even though he created so much of the turmoil that's going on today. And so the question is, how come the genocide that we see today is the thing that's making us open our eyes to how the world is? Why wasn't it Iraq? Why wasn't it Vietnam? Why wasn't it all these other things that occurred throughout recent memory?
I think it was other things too. I mean, I don't think it was just the genocide in Gaza.
Okay.
I think the U.S. occupation, the invasion of Iraq was a big thing. It did open our eyes towards so many things. We've just mentioned the Bush Doctrine and to what extent this was criticized in a sense. So no, I don't think what's occurring in other states or what has occurred has not opened the eyes of the people. But I think what we're seeing in Gaza is really, it's a genocide. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's really bad. Like, it's one of the worst things you can see. So this is shocking. It basically crossed the threshold of something that we're used to seeing, to wars. We're not supposed to be okay, or we're not supposed to be all right with wars taking place in other places and occupation, injustice, violations, etc. But what we're seeing in Gaza is abnormal. It's abnormal compared to the normal that we have been used to during wars. This is a genocide. So this is not only eye-opening, this is crushing.
think it's the fact that we're seeing it, maybe.
That's what I was going to say. I think it's the fact that it's being live streamed. I don't think I don't know if we can compare a war to the other, saying, "Oh, this is worse. This genocide is worse." I think all war crimes and wars that happen are heinous, and they have so many violations intertwined in them. And you can't really judge the severity of something by just comparing it. But I do think that it's the fact that we're seeing it. I don't think we've seen the Iraq war the way we're seeing the Palestine, the genocide in Gaza. I don't think we've seen the Vietnam. You've seen parts of it. It was on TV, but it was not this severity. It was not this intensity of what we're seeing. We're seeing people live streaming it on their phones, like pleading, telling you this is what's happening. Look at us. So I do think Gaza is a smaller geographical area as well. So that also plays a factor. 2 million Palestinians, it's concentrated. So what you're saying is, 10 times fold what you would expect in other places. But I do think it's the fact that it's being live streamed. It's the fact that we've been seeing it.
I think. Oh,
sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, in terms of global consciousness as well, I don't think it's a switch. I think it's more of a kind of a gauge. I think it goes up and down kind of thing. And I think when we have these intense periods of war, like I think what happened in Iraq did wake people up. And I think maybe we went back into a bit of a slumber, and Gaza again woke people up again. Maybe to a further extent because we can see it.
Yeah.
We it's beamed literally into our phones every day. And I think, so I think that's what it is.
People are connecting everything. They're not just talking about the Gaza genocide separately. You see references to other things that happened in different areas. I've heard lots of references to what happened in Iraq and how it was allowed to go on. And I've heard a lot of references of what had happened in Vietnam and other places. So you hear people collectively building a consciousness about the policies of their own countries in the Middle East and in different countries as well.
I see on the media front of things, the Iraq war we had Al Jazeera, pan-Arab media channel out there during the Iraq war. We've seen it. Yep. We've seen it. We've had our parents sitting down in front of the TV and seeing this big statue. We've seen the Iraq war.
The Arabs saw it.
Yeah, I'm Arab. I speak for the Arabs.
I mean, like the global masses didn't see it the same way they see Gaza.
Obviously. Why? That's not because of the media, rather because of the availability of social media. And I think that's where the change has taken place. Mm-hmm. Because now you have citizen journalists on the ground. You have basically material that is being published that is not affected by gatekeepers. And these gatekeepers are basically the policies and politics of the different media corporations, etc. And I know that people might say, okay, we're not supposed to have policies or let's say certain ideologies within media organizations, but that doesn't really exist. We have ideologies within ourselves, therefore we carry them with us within the workforce, etc. But the only difference this time, I think, in addition to the fact that this is a genocide, okay, we know the difference between a genocide, an occupation, a war. There are differences in threshold. This is why we have something called a genocide. It crossed every single threshold that was already a violation of the basic laws of war. So this is even more. It's bigger. Okay, that's one. Plus social media and the effects of it. I think that's two. That's why people are stunned because they're seeing it, as you said, live, and they're seeing it without gatekeepers, and they're seeing something that they haven't seen for ages. Because I don't think any other genocide. Well, this is one of the most recent genocides that was really broadcasted on
not documented
every.
The same way.
Yeah,
it's not. I don't think anything in the past has been documented in the same way.
Best documented. But that actually raises the question: is the term genocide a good enough term to describe what's happening? Is it even an adequate term in general? Like, for example, even as a legal concept, in Bosnia, the only crime that was considered genocide was Srebrenica, but that was what, 8,000, 9,000. The Serbs killed over 200,000 Bosnians. So how come that's the only thing that's considered genocide? Is genocide even a good enough term, and is it a good enough concept to describe what's happening in Gaza today?
I think what's important to understand is, firstly, let's speak. I don't want to bore you with legal details, but the term genocide, as Sarah has mentioned, was coined to describe the most heinous of crimes. So it's like one of the worst atrocities that can be committed. Now, the other part of it, where I might bore you for like 30 seconds with legal details, is the international courts and their application of law is not just based on law. Sometimes politics play a role, and this is something we all know. So the way that some of the genocides have gone probably unconvicted by different courts, or there wasn't a determination made that this was a genocide versus a determination made that this is a genocide, might have had to do a bit with politics at that period of time and who was influencing that kind of politics. It's the same kind of politics we're seeing now interfering with the International Criminal Court, imposing sanctions on its employees, on the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. And it's the same politics that have stopped the International Criminal Court from issuing arrest warrants until November 2024. We're talking 13 months of genocide happening. And I mean, it didn't even issue arrest warrants for genocide. The only legal authority that have issued something on the basis of it being, a clear risk of genocide or plausible genocide was the International Court of Justice when South Africa went there and they requested provisional measures for, under the Genocide Convention. So these, I think, it can take us forever to go into the legal semantics and the definitions of things and discuss why things were described as a genocide versus not.
But I think to just not leave the audience or the viewers hopeless or helpless at this point because of the terminologies that we have in the law, and they're basically put there. This is what we can use. Is the fact that just like politics can affect the law being applied to the best of its abilities, it can also coin terminologies that can later on be adapted and applied within the law. We say apartheid, for instance. Apartheid was never a legal term. It was a political term to basically describe what has taken place in South Africa. And then later on, it has been adopted as a legal term. So there's nothing to say basically that we won't have a term that would characterize or that would, for instance, define what we're seeing in Palestine, whether in the occupied West Bank, Gaza, etc., with this occupation, this I don't know, they refer to it as an illegal. It's an illegal, but there's a terminology that people try to coin, basically scholars try to coin, which is an illegal occupation. They try to coin it as an illegal occupation. So, well, no, because occupation can neither be legal nor illegal, and occupation is illegal. So how can you name it as an illegal occupation to define what we have in Palestine? Maybe what we can see in the future is actually a terminology that comes out that is later on adopted to define what the Palestine case, to define what we've seen in Palestine. So this could be something.
No, I think I see where Sarah's coming from, and I think one thing to mention here as well is that when we're talking about genocide, we're talking about the genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. But it's one term that describes a crime that is happening against people in a geographical area in the occupied Palestinian territory. We have millions of Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem that are also suffering from Israel's settler colonial project that is taking place on the ground. And as Sarah said, there are terms that are political terms that don't have a legal definition. Ethnic cleansing, political term, no legal definition until this point, but we use it because it describes the status of what is happening. So I think it's also important to understand that one crime might be taking place, but that doesn't negate the fact that other crimes might be taking place as well on the ground. So we're talking about forcible transfer, exploitation of natural resources, people being displaced from their own homes and lands, and those lands being turned into illegal settlements. You're talking about the destruction of refugee camps, and the killing of Palestinian civilians in Jenin and Tulkarem in Nur Shams and Jenin's refugee camp. So you're talking about not one crime. It's a complex system of crimes that have been carried out against the Palestinian people since the very existence of Israel's colonial project in Palestine, that bases itself and bases its existence on the non-existence of the indigenous Palestinian people to that land. So, everything that they do is to affect the existence of Palestinian people, is to erase the Palestinian existence in the city, either through policies, either through actual crimes being committed on the ground. So I think, yes, the term genocide is one term. It describes a set of crimes that are being committed to reach a specific goal, but it's not the only crime that is being committed.
You went to Jerusalem recently, right?
Yes.
Maybe we can move on to talk about how things are going on there at the moment, because, like you mentioned, we are focusing a lot on Gaza because of the extent and the gravity of what's going on there, but there are still crimes being committed in Jerusalem and the West Bank.
Yes, and I think I went recently twice, and I always feel like I'm so privileged to be able to go back, and I will never take it for granted, even though I'm from there and I was born and raised there. But you just never know what would happen, and it's such an honor to be there. But I think one thing that I've before we talk about this, one thing I thought about for the past like a year and a half is, with everything that was happening in Gaza, no one really felt it was appropriate to speak about the other things that were happening because they weren't even anywhere near bad as what was happening in Gaza. But now, thinking about it these days, and this is a recent realization that I've started to have, is that just because a more heinous crime is taking place against Palestinians in Gaza or in a certain geographical area does not mean that you should normalize or feel okay with the crimes that are happening against you, regardless of how minimal they might be. So I think I just wanted to preface the conversation by that.
Can I also say that it's also, sorry to cut you off, but as in like it's also a kind of tactic, because like what happened when they had a ceasefire is that Israel had a ceasefire in Gaza, but at the same time it really increased, ramped up what they were doing in the West Bank, and they've been doing that ever since they started the genocide in Gaza as well.
Even before it was what was happening in Jenin was happening way before the genocide started. I think it was happening for over a year from then, but the West didn't really pay it that much attention. I think there wasn't enough focus on what was happening as well.
On the 6th of October, reports came out saying it was the deadliest year for children in the West Bank.
Yes,
on
I
record.
agree. Yeah, I remember I was working on analysis of that report and a summary, and we were following the news. But yeah, going back to the main topic, I went to Jerusalem recently. I was there visiting family. Obviously, every time I go back, I notice how worse the situation is than the last time I've left it. So you can see, significant crackdown on Palestinian liberties and freedoms, specifically in Jerusalem, because we're talking about a city where there's heavily existing policing forces by the Israelis, by the occupying forces. Recently we've seen the crackdown on bookshops in Jerusalem. I know that might sound ridiculous, and it does. Like, in my head as a Palestinian, it's messed up. It does sound ridiculous, and when you're seeing the footage of children killed and massacred on the ground in Gaza. But actually, isn't that simple when you're talking about people being held accountable to the books they read or the books they sell or what kind of spaces they gather in to discuss different kind of things and culture. Imagine yourself in the UK not being able to go to your bookshop because some of the books incite against the government, and then when the government is asked to produce its arguments, they have no arguments. It's just a malicious accusation against a bookshop that is of Palestinian presence. The settler presence has intensified. I'm seeing 15-year-old settlers walking the streets of the old city in Jerusalem with machinery guns. Why are you walking in a city with machinery guns? And this is not something new. We've seen this. I grew up in Jerusalem. I walked these streets before settlers even felt safe to walk the streets without police protection or the Israeli offensive forces protection. But now you're seeing it more. They're acting as if, this is ours, and now we have guns and we will shoot with the protection of the state. backed by the state. You're saying the West Bank being turned into small, tiny containers that are, separated and shut down whenever the Israeli regime wants it to be shut down. So, checkpoints, people are queuing for 4 or 5 hours on daily basis, and they work in the West Bank and they go on daily basis. Imagine this much time being wasted from your life. We're talking about also the killing of Palestinians in the West Bank. We're talking about the destruction of vital infrastructure in refugee camps, and you see that on the ground. Now people are talking about Israeli authorities possibly issuing permission for people from one city in the West Bank to go to another city in the West Bank. That's something that people are expecting on the ground. So imagine like this complex system of systematic violations and undermining Palestinians as people and as humans. I think that's...
Yeah, and you mentioned a very important point, the fear of books. And this comes from somewhere, right? It's not just the fear of the words within the books. It's not just the fear of education, because education is so important. It's also the fear of culture. And this is why separation takes place. This is why we have checkpoints. It's because when you no longer know what your culture is, in terms of traditions, in terms of folklore, so on and so forth, and this is when you tend to lose your identity. And with the checkpoints, with the separations, when you enforce a checkpoint from one place to another, you are separating the identity of these people from one another by making them live differently, yes, enclosed within their own environment, unable to mix with their very own, but within a different city. So I think there's always a bigger picture to things, and it's not just a book. Is not just a book. A library is not just a library. Exactly. It's more than that. It's your own identity. So
I think also I think your experience is very interesting because you grew up in Jerusalem and then now you're away, but you go back every now and then. It's just like a check-in and you get to see how different it is. For me, my experience with Palestine is I went when I was very young, and then I was very lucky enough to go back again a few years ago. And for me, I think like obviously it's a very foreign experience when I went there. Like obviously I'm from that land, but you get there. I'm lucky enough to grow up in the UK where we have a lot of freedoms here, and so in terms of at least movement, I mean I can go to Birmingham without any issues. Not that I would ever want to go to Birmingham, by the way. I'm joking. Oh, no. I'm joking. No, but. One of the things is I'm from Hebron, for instance, and one thing that I wanted to do when I was there, I wanted to visit the Ibrahimi Mosque. It's a very historical mosque. People say that the Prophet Abraham is buried there, and that holds significant values for both Muslims and Jews as well. But I remember standing there, going through the old city in Hebron, and first of all, you see the netting. That's above, and you're speaking to the locals and you're asking them why do we have netting above us, and that's in large part because the settlement is in the center of the city, in the old city, and so while the shop fronts at the bottom are still Palestinian owned, for those that still are around, a lot of people have been driven out. So I would say from what I remember, it was around 50% were open, yes. 50% were closed. And then the houses above, or the apartments above, they were all inhabited by Israeli settlers in the West Bank, which is illegal. And they used to throw trash on the Palestinians below, and stones, and then so the knitting was put up, and so then they graduated. They found a different way to do it. So they're throwing like dirty liquids and I don't know, and so you have that experience of you're walking through the old city and you're seeing that and you're like, oh wow, okay, and you could actually see bottles and stuff like hanging in the nets and stuff, and then you carry on, you're seeing like 50% of the shop fronts are closed. What a few people are there, they're not really making any money. They're more there as a resistance, to resist the occupation of the areas.
Existence is resistance. Existence is resistance.
Exactly, and so they're not making any money. There's no economic value to being there this time, but they decide to remain there. And then you get to the point where you can go through to the Ibrahimi Mosque, and there's like this huge cage checkpoint, and you get pushed into it, and you're like literally like stuck in between I don't know, at the time, maybe at least 60, 70 people in this like little cage
A
with
chicken
children.
cage, that's what we call it.
Yeah, oh,
Yes.
That's how it felt. I felt like I didn't feel like a chicken. I felt more like a sheep. Like I was just being herded and not in a humane way.
Why is the cage there?
Why is the cage
It's
there?
like a checkpoint. It's
You're talking about
simple.
in Hebron specifically.
Yeah, why?
Oh,
Why is that specific?
I think that's that specific cage. I think is as a result of the massacre that happened in Shara Shuhada is what we call it.
It's in the mosque.
In the mosque. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you know more about that history.
1994.
Yeah.
The Baruch Goldstein, a Israeli Jew who was born in the US in New York, I think it was, extremist Zionist, went to the Ibrahimi Mosque and he massacred upwards of 30, I think, Palestinian worshippers, including women and children. And he was killed by some of the other worshippers. He went and massacred a whole bunch of them. And what was the Israeli response to that?
To further police the Palestinians.
They locked off half of the mosque to the Palestinians, so Palestinians couldn't access more than half of the mosque anymore.
Yeah.
And then they put checkpoints for the Palestinians when the Palestinians were the ones being attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, continue. Stuff.
No, but but as in, that speaks to the way that security and policing works in Palestine. But yeah, so you're in this cage and you're waiting for them to approve a few of you to go in at a time, and you finally get through, and you already feel like you're human, like humanity's been stripped from you, as if like somebody can treat you like that just because you're Palestinian. So already you're like, as if I'm less. I mean, this is part of the psyche, isn't it? It's to make you feel like you're less. You don't have the same rights as me. And then also, you get further. I was lucky enough, alhamdulillah, to get through to the Ibrahimi Mosque. I got to go and see it and pray there. And then after that as well, so my great grandfather, he used to have a house that was right next to the Ibrahimi Mosque, but now this is in the settlement side of it. And so I wanted to go see the place. It doesn't exist anymore, but I wanted to see at least where it was, to think that, your great grandparent had a house there, and this is where we used to be at least. Like I hear stories of my grandfather there and some of my uncles, who were alive at the time. And so it's a bit further down. So you go further down, and this is Shara Shuhada as well. And you hear stories about. I was with an auntie, and she was telling me, "Oh, they see over there that's a swimming pool that we used to all go to when we were young, and then we were going to turn left, if I remember correctly, turn left towards where the land is that the house used to sit on. And as soon as we started to walk in that direction, then all of a sudden these young 15-year-old or like 16, 17-year-old soldiers start to scramble, and they're like, "Oh, where are you going? What are you doing?" And they just tell you, no, you're not allowed. Yeah. Even as British citizen, you're not allowed. We think that you're there for, I don't know, nefarious reasons or whatever. But yeah, that's the reality of it. That was my experience. But yeah.
What you're saying really reminds me of something. You're telling me now. You're saying to us, your aunt was telling you that we used to swim there. I've seen this growing up. Like I can tell you now, walking the streets of Jerusalem, the difference. I grew up in Sheikh Jarrah, and I remember which neighbor and which neighbors of ours were forcibly displaced from their own homes, and we'd stand at the balcony at 4 a.m. seeing people, Israeli settlers, come and take over their houses, and the people staying in the street for months protesting the forcible displacement and not wanting to go anywhere else because there isn't anywhere else. This is their house. So I walk the streets of Jerusalem, and I can tell you, this 20 years ago, this Palestinian family lived here. Like I can tell you where the Hannoun family lived, where the Al-Kurd family lived. I can tell you the houses that were taken. And this is such a tragic reality for Palestinians on the ground. You're saying that, your aunt was telling you this, but imagine you yourself as a Palestinian having to witness this day in, day out, and growing up with that realization, seeing all of these things on the ground, and that is your reality, that is your consciousness, these are the memories as a child that you remember. The screams of Palestinians being displaced from their homes at 4 a.m. in the morning when you're just 13 years old. Imagine this, being what constitutes your collective memory and your experience in life.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Why is Sheikh Jarrah so important to the zealous? We always hear about Sheikh Jarrah specifically, that one single neighborhood.
This is why I think everyone should go to Jerusalem, because they will understand the importance of Sheikh Jarrah. So Sheikh Jarrah geographically is a very, very important area. It is the connection between the outskirts of Jerusalem and the inner center of Jerusalem. So there is no way to get to central Jerusalem without passing Sheikh Jarrah from anywhere, from any side. It's like the central point. And that is one of the main reasons that it's been such, they wanted to confiscate as much as they can. And they did. They confiscated so much, and the upcoming few years. But it's also it's part of the central city of Jerusalem, and it's not just Sheikh Jarrah. I mean, I know we hear more about it. It's because of activists being there and probably the media attention that it gained in 2021. But you also have other neighborhoods in Jerusalem that are as vital as Sheikh Jarrah, and you also have to cross them. Like Silwan, for example. You see a lot of displacement happening in Silwan, forced displacement of Palestinians. It's the same reasons. It constitutes what the city of Jerusalem is. It encompasses it, and it's very vital for their overall plan of the Judaization of the entirety of the city.
There's a question I've actually had for many years about Jerusalem, which is, since 1948, the Zionist entity had control of the western part of Jerusalem. And then they took control of the eastern part in 1967. What's that like? What is there a major difference between the western part and the eastern part? Like historically, is there something there, connect? Like what connects them?
I don't know if there's historically a major difference. I just think that's where most people. I mean, I know families that lived in areas in Western Jerusalem, but I think these areas were conquered first in 1948. I actually would like to draw my word of conquered, taken over, ethnically cleansed,
stolen
areas. So that's where it's stolen, and that's where the most heavily Palestinian population stayed in East Jerusalem at that point, and that's why there is a more Palestinian population on the eastern side. But if you go to Jerusalem, there's no difference. You cannot tell the moment that you step in Western Jerusalem. You cannot. I mean, you can tell by seeing the more devastated neighborhoods, the second-class citizens. Then you know that this is a Palestinian neighborhood. But there's no actual physical boundary or border. I was telling one of my colleagues that when they go to Jerusalem, they have to do this walk, and it's in the old city, and all of a sudden you leave through one of the gates of the old city, and there's something called the new gate, Bab al-Khalil. And once you leave through that gate, you're all of a sudden in Western Jerusalem, when you just were in East Jerusalem. So it's a very ridiculous kind of reality on the ground, actually, because you don't know what is happening. It's discombobulates you in your brain. You're like, what is happening? But I think historically it's because it's been the western parts of Jerusalem have been ethnically cleansed in 1948, and there were no heavy Palestinian presence after the ethnic cleansing, and that's why.
In your recent trip, did you have any interactions with Israelis? Did you hear what they were saying about what's going on, what they're saying about the government?
I saw some of the leftovers of their banners that were protesting the Israeli conduct in Gaza, but not because of the Israeli conduct in Gaza, but because they wanted their hostages back. Let's just be clear on that. I don't believe that the Israeli population as a people, from my experience, really care or know what their government is doing to Palestinians. And if they do know, I don't think it's any of their concern. I mean, they all go to the military, they all partake in these activities that are happening. Not many interactions apart from them being armed. I think the fear of driving through roads that are mixed roads, so from the West Bank to Jerusalem, roads that were surrounded by settlements, and seeing them on both sides, the settlers armed and ready to attack, but not really more than that.
I remember once I went to Palestine, I was fortunate to go, and I went to Akka in the kind of northern coast, and that was probably the most humiliating experience for me as a Palestinian, to walk through that through the streets of Akka. I went to the old city, where it's basically the people who live there are mostly Arabs, or completely, or almost all Arabs. And we went to the restaurant. We just found this random fish restaurant. There's no Arabic on the menus. Yeah. We're walking around the streets. I'm hearing Hebrew music, even though everyone there is Arab. Turns out there was some sort of some sort of Hebrew celebrations, Jewish celebrations. So a lot of Israelis were making the way, a lot of religious Israelis were making the way to the coast. But at every point, it seemed like the residents of this town were bending over backwards to cater for the Israeli overlords, so to speak. It really felt like the only way for them to survive is to succumb to Israeli supremacy. And for me, that was like to see it real time, to see the conclusion of Israeli colonization when the Palestinians are not forced out but they remain, is a conclusion in which the Palestinians are subjugated, they're second-class citizens, and they're not seen as anything else except cheap labor, people to be exploited. And that brings me on to a point that Zionists always make, which is, before the war, we were giving so many people in Gaza jobs. So many people had permits to go and work in Israel. Well, the only reason you're doing that is because their labor is cheaper. That's the only reason they're doing that.
Not only that, I recently read a book called My Father Was a Freedom Fighter by Ramzi Baroud, and I recommend everyone who's interested in what's happening today in Gaza to read that book, because it's the same playbook of what Israel is doing today that was done in 1948, 1967, all throughout history. The same things that are happening today in Gaza have happened all of these years. And the book specifically talks about the writer's father in a very critical point in history where Palestinians in Gaza were forced to go work in Israel and seek labor in Israel. And the reason for that is that the collective policies of the Israeli state in Gaza and how they've created devastated economic situation for Palestinians have forced Palestinians to leave. Because Gaza is made of a lot of refugee camps, as you know. A lot of Palestinians were displaced from all around the cities in 1948 to Gaza. And with the constant crackdown on Palestinians and the violations against them and the massacring of Palestinians in Gaza, they've managed to create a devastated population with no access to economic resources, financial resources, natural resources. People didn't find food to eat back in the day. So that's when the idea of labor in Israel started. And a lot of people opposed it at the beginning. But it seemed like it was the only option for them at some point to be able to feed their families and be able to bring in any money. And that's actually something that is historically discussed in books and talked about. So yes, we say that Israel brings these Palestinian labor because they're cheaper, but it's also because it has created conditions where these Palestinians have no other way of survival but having to do this kind of labor.
And the Gazans have to be thankful that they allow them to do so as well. Grateful,
it's like them detaining you and telling you, but be grateful that you're still alive.
Yeah,
it's the same kind of messed up analogy.
Yeah, they want us to beg for the crumbs that they give us, to be grateful for the crumbs that they give us, and any pushback is met with devastating response. No matter how little. I mean, even if you simply go and ask for justice in the courts abroad, and now this is lawfare, and you're an anti-Semite, and this is blood libel, and this and that, and they try to bring up, they try to make connections between you and the anti-Semites of 20th century Europe, and at every stage, there is no recourse for Palestinians. In any way, like we're seeing kind of the work that you're doing in terms of legally, but there's pushback everywhere, and for a lot of Palestinians in places like Jenin, for example, what recourse is there? You're sitting in this refugee camp, you've been forced from your lands, the Palestinian controlled authority, the government that administers your areas, is working against you. They are aiding the Zionist occupation. What recourse do you have? And then the international so-called community, they are taken aback by how certain Palestinians react to the conditions that the West have forced them into. And it's only human nature to react a particular way. I'm not condoning any actions. I'm just trying to explain the kind of the circumstance that we find ourselves in terms of the way that the Palestinians view the Western world, the way the Palestinians view Israel and how they can interact with their occupier. But I wanted to ask you, Dania, because you were born and raised in Jerusalem, and you've interacted with different types of Palestinians. As a Palestinian born in the West, I don't really interact with Palestinians who were born in Palestine that often. Do you see that there's a difference? Palestinians living in exile versus Palestinians living, like, I'm sure there is a difference. What kind of differences have you seen?
Yeah, I think there are differences, but I would like, on this question, I will go back to a very important point that Sarah has made, which is, let's start from there, the creation of checkpoints, which creates different realities and social fabric of the Palestinian society. So when you ask me if there's a difference between Palestinians in Palestine and Palestinians in the West, I would certainly say yes. There's a difference between Palestinians in, historical Palestine, in Jerusalem, in the West Bank and Gaza. We are all different. We have all had different realities with different response to events and, a different upbringing and different way of thinking about things. For the Palestinian in Jerusalem, their main way of resisting is to exist. And that existing comes at the expense of you having to work so many long hours to pay the financial burden of being able to own or rent a house in Jerusalem, pay the very expensive bills, for example, having to go through checkpoints because a lot of Palestinians would rather work in the West Bank, specifically people who work in the human rights field. They'd rather not work in Israeli NGOs and normalize that this is okay. So they would go work in other jobs in the West Bank for Palestinian civil society organizations. And it's so difficult for each of us to understand the reality of other Palestinians. I'd say the closest to you would be Jerusalemites and West Bank. They might be able to understand the reality of each other more because before the wall was built, families lived in both areas. So my family is half West Bank and half Jerusalemite. So, you see the both realities. So, yes, of course, there's a difference with Palestinians in the West that you meet. But it's a difference of lived reality. It's a difference of lived realities. It's not that they're less Palestinian or more Palestinian. No one is. It's not a competition. But it's that, when, as opposed to you saying something once, you're not exposed to it on daily basis. So you don't feel the same way about it. And that comes to some people not understanding, for example, that, being able to exist for us and be in our land might be the only course that we might take at some point because this is the best course. I mean, sometimes being in Jerusalem and Jerusalemites being in Jerusalem is what has kept Jerusalem a Palestinian city and what has kept Palestinian presence in it. So I think the differences are minimal at the end of the day. It's about exposure and non-exposure. And I think it's about seeing what kind of liberties they have in the West and what kind of privileges they can use in the West to advocate for the Palestinian cause, which we don't have access to. The only reason I have access to this kind of these kind of liberties or this kind of system is because I live here now. I moved here, but they have all of that. So I think it's important to keep these discussions happening and for them to stay exposed to what's happening on the ground. And obviously, when Palestinians are not just in the West, you have a lot of Palestinian diaspora in different refugee camps all around the world in the Middle East, and it's very important to keep the conversations happening with them. I feel like they're often sometimes forgotten or neglected from the conversation. So yeah.
Sarah, you're a Palestinian exile who lives in the Middle East. What's it like for you to be kind of so close yet so far at the same time?
I think there's a conflict. There's always an internal conflict between who you are, how Palestinian are you, and what does Palestine actually mean to you. And whilst I do not believe that one Palestinian who's born in Palestine is different in their Palestinianism, let's call it, to a Palestinian abroad, wherever they are. But I do believe that because of the different lived realities, they tend to be very different in the way they carry themselves. And this is only normal because of the baggage. So it's different baggage. So for instance, and I've noticed it when I've dealt with people from both the West Bank, Jerusalem, and from the Palestinians living in Israel, and the Palestinians living abroad, etc. I've seen the differences. You see you see Palestinians who are more laid back in a sense in the way they carry themselves and the way they deal with day-to-day life, And then that's more on the end of the, I think, and at least that's how I saw it, and the Palestinians who are either living abroad or the Palestinians who have, who have lived in Israel. So to them, it's a bit more laid back in a sense. When dealing with Palestinians who have been either in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, etc., there's a certain tension that you feel. And this is only normal given that their day-to-day life is tension. It's basically them existing. It's them holding the baggage of having to pass through checkpoints, hours. I mean, how you used to tell me you drive for an hour and a half, 2 hours just to get through the checkpoints when it's actually supposed to be, what, a 25, 30-minute journey?
It's a 20-minute drive.
Yeah.
Last time I queued for 3 hours.
Wow. And then they come with this certain, and it's so only normal psychologically, they come with a certain baggage. It's them always being on edge, them always being like them trying to survive even when the environment around them changes. But it does, and then you have the Palestinians who have no relations to Palestine in a sense, who have never been to Palestine, my case for instance, who only know that they're Palestinian or of Palestinian origin because of their grandparents, because of the culture, history, folklore. They normally struggle, or at least to me, it's a struggle of, well, how Palestinian am I? What does Palestine mean? What does Palestinian mean? Is it by knowing how to dress, or is it by knowing the cultural fabric? Which technically I don't fit in either. I mean, I'm not a Palestinian, but I'm not a Palestinian either. So what am I? There's always this question that you carry with yourself. At least this is a question I carried. And I constantly carry, especially when dealing with different Palestinians. I've dealt with Dania, for instance, got to know her. She's a Palestinian, and I saw bits of Palestine through her, and I had encounters with other Palestinians from other places and saw bits of Palestine in them. But where do I belong, in a sense? This is the question of belonging.
I don't know if you got, I mean, probably not you, Dania, but maybe for the people who haven't lived in Palestine, I've been toiling with this idea as well, which is the idea of survivor's guilt. Mm-hmm. That, like, we were, in a sense, lucky enough to, I mean, it's not lucky, but the goal, what you want is to be able to live in your land freely and not have to deal with this. But the fact that we grew up not under occupation, I grew up in the UK, in London. It's going to make another joke about Birmingham, but it's fine.
I don't know what UK politics there are in this, but please don't get us dragged into this. Don't.
No, but as in, yeah. So we're not under occupation. Is the reality of it. Your day-to-day life is not under occupation. Although I constantly heard about it, and I constantly felt it through hearing about cousins who are being arrested for nothing, or even I was talking, or I heard about my speaking to my grandma recently, and she was talking about how she was possibly going to. She doesn't live in Palestine, but she was going to go to Palestine because one of my cousins is going to be released soon. It's one of the but yeah. So you hear about these things and you're always around them, but you never feel them, you never live them. So I don't know what it's like for that cousin to have been arrested, and from what I've heard or I've been told, is tortured and interrogated by the Israeli army. I can't know that, and there's a kind of guilt that exists there, for me at least. That's not something that I have experienced.
I think it shouldn't hold us back, though. I think
agreed.
This is,
no.
We always have to be conscious of this. Okay, there's this guilt, but it shouldn't hold us back. It shouldn't. It shouldn't absorb us in a sense.
No, of
because
course.
It wasn't a choice, right?
No, yeah.
So that's one thing. And I think there's a perk to everything. I mean, there's a perk to be able to live in your country and to. For instance, if the West Bank is no longer occupied, Gaza is no longer occupied, we have a free Palestine, etc. It's really beautiful to belong to that place, right? And to me, this is a perk. This is a perk the Palestinians have that I don't technically have because I'm of Palestinian heritage, but I don't have the paperwork, etc. That makes me Palestinian on paper. So this is a perk. And our perk, on the other hand, is living comfortably, maybe starting off from a place where there is no tension in a sense. We're not fighting to exist, meaning fighting our day-to-day life. And that there's a perk in that too. So
but
it's just different.
We get the kind of the option to opt in. We can reject our Palestinianness, being in the West or being not living in Palestine. But if you're in Palestine, there's no opt out. You're under occupation, and there's no way that they'll see you anything other than Palestinian. So when you're in Jerusalem, when you're in Hebron, when you're in Jenin, you are a Palestinian. The only way for you to kind of opt out is to betray the Palestinians and start working for the Zionist entity. But
I
other
hear
than that,
what
there's
you're
no
saying,
opt out.
but I know I've heard so many different things being said, but I think I want to say something because I heard Mustafa say it twice now that he's lucky, and then he, corrected himself at some point that he grew up in the West and didn't grow up under occupation. It's right, you didn't grow up under occupation, but you're also unlucky in the sense that you didn't grow up, and I feel that is a very sad bit of reality. You didn't grow up where you were supposed to, or you didn't have the option to do that, to go live there and grow up, because you just grew up where your parents wanted you to grow up at the end of the day. But, being able to identify with this identity of being Palestinian, knowing what it is, not being lost throughout life and not be wondering what it is, because yes, you can hear from different Palestinians about their realities, but it is never the same as living that reality. Or you're in constant search of your identity as a Palestinian and where you belong, and you might never belong anywhere at the end. You might not feel like you belong in Palestine, and you also might not feel that you belong in other countries and other places where you grew up, where you were, and that's actually very unlucky for someone to grow up with and live with. But I think there's also, going to the perks where Sarah said everything has a perk, I do think that when you grow up a Palestinian and you're attached to your Palestinian cause and identity that you know of, and with how much you come from a more privileged place to advocate for the Palestinian cause, because at the end of the day, the pressure on Palestinians on the ground is to survive. Be Palestinians, live in your lands, cultivate it, use your land, stay there, survive the occupation. But as Palestinians all around the world, you have a duty towards the Palestinians that are on the ground existing and resisting, to actually advocate for them, to talk about the injustices that are happening with them, about Israel's colonial apartheid regime that they're living under. So I think this is the privilege that you guys have, that I know I work in this field, but there's only so many years more that I can give probably to this field before I feel like I'm going to
okay,
get a
Dania,
break.
you're better than us. You've done both. You've done the stuff inside and the outside. I'm checking.
But you know what I mean. It's,
Yeah.
It doesn't. You start from a place of stress, as Sarah said. I think that was a very accurate statement. You're always in survival mode.
What you said there at the beginning reminded me of two things. Firstly, I saw this music video recently for a song called Mayyil ala Baladi. You've probably all heard it.
Yes.
So it's the first time I ever see this video, first time I hear the song, first time I see the video. So I'm listening to the song, it's like Mayyil ala Baladi la tshuf kif al-bahr bidhak, like so Mayyil, how do you translate Mayyil?
Pass by.
Pass by, come
Pass
through.
by, come
Pass by
over.
to my homeland or whatever. You'll see how the sea smiles for you. So I see this coastline, right, and I start seeing all these landmarks and things and that, and I'm struggling to figure out where this place is, and I'm watching and I'm listening and I still don't know where this place is, and then I don't know, like 30 seconds into the song, and after seeing a whole bunch of landmarks which I don't recognize, I finally hear the name of a Palestinian town. I'm like, I don't know Palestine. I don't know what it is. Like, I've been deprived of the ability to know what my land looks like.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know any of these landmarks. And one landmark I finally recognized was the Baha'i garden. And that's like,
Yes.
I mean, it's Palestine, but it's like Baha'ism is like this whole thing. And anyway, but it kind of like really made me think. I can't. It made me a little emotional as well. But I don't know what my land looks like.
And instead, you know what Birmingham looks like.
Oh my God. This
my God.
Birmingham thing. This is going to go viral.
What's the
just
beef with
because of your
Birmingham?
Birmingham.
I don't even know.
He likes Birmingham, by the way.
Oh, dear God. If
I
that's,
doubt
don't
it. I
defame
doubt
me
it.
if that's him liking Birmingham, I don't know what's
Exactly.
you not liking
Birmingham is a
someplace.
great place, by the way.
Yeah.
It's a great place. The food there is good, and it's cheaper than London.
Lots of places are cheaper than London.
That's true. The other thing that it reminded me of is I saw this this interview with the actor Pierce Brosnan. He played James Bond stage, and the guy interviewing him, he's speaking to him. This is a very interesting accent. Turns out Pierce Brosnan is from this, I think it's an Irish town or something, and it's a village, sorry. And this guy interviewing him is from that same village. And then all of a sudden, when Pierce, the actor, realizes that they have this connection, they start reminiscing about different things in that village. And again, I don't know what it's like to be from Hebron. It's like, okay, I can say I'm from Hebron, I can say from Beir Saba.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it's like to visit, to grow up in those streets, to see all the uncles and aunties and say hi to them, and then be scolded by someone for running into something I shouldn't have run into. I don't know what it's like to grow up in these areas and to know these streets, to know the smells, to know the sights, in Beir Saba as well. And this is something that we as Palestinians who've been exiled, we've been deprived of. And even those who live in Palestine,
Yes.
they've been deprived of that experience as well, in a sense, because they don't see I don't want to say natural, but kind of the natural way things would have been had it not been for the occupation. And this is kind of the reality for Palestinians, but also other colonized peoples elsewhere. But yeah, that's just something
It's a sad truth I actually relate to. When you said the story about the music, I don't know, piece and video clip and so on that you've heard, it just, I don't know, this memory just popped in my head. And it's during my master's degree over here, when I was doing it at SOAS, I met a lady. She's German, and she asked where I'm from, and I told her I'm Palestinian. She's like, where from? So I'm like, my family is from Hebron, my dad's family, but they were always born and raised in Nablus. And she was shocked. She's like, oh, I've been to Nablus. I've been to this street, that street. I had knafe at this place. And she was speaking to me in like the broken Arabic, because she just learned how to speak Arabic in Palestine, in Nablus. And I'm like, yeah. And then she's like, do you know about this and that and that? Have you been? And I'm like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have never been there in my life. And she knows more than I do in my own city, about my own city. And she's walked that city maybe 100 times, and I haven't. And I maybe never will. But like, and then the next day she came to uni and she brought me a small bag of za'atar. And this is when my heart sunk, because I'm the one who's supposed to be bringing her za'atar. I'm the one who's supposed to be introducing her as a German to my country, to my heritage, to my food. And I wasn't able to do that. And this is something that and we even spoke about this once.
Yeah.
Remember when we were at that cafe and we're having tea, and I remember I told Dania, I don't know, like, I don't belong technically anywhere. You, at the very end of the day, will go back to Palestine. I not really, maybe not. So it's always there's always a pro and con. So I think there's something that's always heavy in the hearts of those who are born and raised outside, and even heavier on those who can never go back realistically in the modern day in time. So yeah.
Well, hopefully you get to go back soon.
Yeah.
But on the sea and the song you were hearing, I had a conversation with my friend who lived she came to the UK to do her PhD. She's from Bethlehem. So I was having a conversation with her on her very last day in the UK. And I was like, oh, what did you do today as your last day in the UK? She said, I went to the beach. And I was like, is this how you're saying goodbye to years of living in the UK? And she said, I can never see the beach in Palestine. I will never be able to see the beach in my country. I will never be able to see the sea. And I just, you talk about survival's guilt, and it has levels of that. The
Yes.
privilege that you feel sometimes, how privileged you are to be from Jerusalem, to be able to see the rest of your country as opposed to others. And I think that also applies to people with Israeli nationality. It's a step more. So yeah.
Yeah, and on the question of return, there's actually a question I want to ask if you guys would actually return. But if Palestine is freed, right, and then you have someone who's from, for example, Jaffa, who their families were forced out in 1948, and they've had to live their lives outside of Palestine, and then let's say they're in a refugee camp in Lebanon, and they want to return, and they return to something that's, mean, they wouldn't recognize it because they haven't seen it, but they wouldn't recognize it from the stories, and it's so clear it's not Palestinian. And I wonder what that would be like. And that also leads me to the question is, it might be different for you, Daniel, because you actually live there, but for those who don't live there, if Palestine was free, would you return?
I think it's a very difficult question. I'm very much Palestinian, but I'm very much also British, and I'm a Londoner, and I like being here, and I enjoy being here. It does feel like home in a way, and so even thinking about leaving the UK for any country is right now not feasible for me. I love being here, so it's a difficult question, but I think it's definitely somewhere that I'd like to visit and see freely, when I don't have to be in a hen cage.
For me, I don't know. I don't know. Depends what Palestine would look like then, right? Because I'm not sure it will look like me, and I'm not sure I will look like it. And if I don't, then can I truly adapt to the new face, or to the new structure, or to the new me in it? I'm not quite sure. I don't know.
Isn't there a question of us as the people in the diaspora, as well as the people in Palestine, shaping what Palestine would look like as well? Not just it doesn't exist on its own; it's shaped by its people, isn't it? So there's a question of going back and shaping what it looks like, and
that would be quite interesting to see. But I mean, in terms of the way it's going to look like, it's going to probably, I don't know. I can't tell. But I do assume it's going to look like the people who have lived there. Obviously, people who are abroad will also, so many of which will be reluctant to come back. You say that you're born and raised here now. You have this connection with this country. So
that's true. But I think it's. But I think. I don't want to go back to that idea. But I live in comfort here. I think the majority of Palestinians aren't lucky to do that. They live in refugee camps in Lebanon and in Syria and in Jordan.
For all the faults of the United Kingdom, you are not made to feel like you're not British.
Yeah.
Right? You are British. Right? Even though you're also Palestinian. But in the Arab countries, no, you're Palestinian. You're not one of us. You're not Jordanian. You're not Lebanese. You're not Egyptian. You're Palestinian. So there is actually a bit of a difference there, in that even the Palestinians in the Arab world, they haven't been given the opportunity to find a home.
There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. There are two explanations, or two claims or theories to that. One being that, because you're not one of us, so you can't be technically one of us. They don't give this identity out, just like some Western countries do, like the US, for instance, or the UK, etc., after a duration of time, because it's not a transactional thing in some states. So it's not a transaction. So there's this claim, and there's another claim of, we are here, this is your way of protecting your identity for when you come back, right? For when you go back to your country, you should remain Palestinian. So there are always two claims, but I think on the topic of what will Palestine look like, and if I would be able to go back or not and live there or not, I'm really not as concerned with this as I am with the fact that I would love to have that option.
It's true.
I would just love to have that option. I would love for my people to build the Palestine that they want to build, and for it to change over time. And just having the freedom to do something like that is enough for me. The rest about, will it look like me? Will I be able to live there? I really don't care, so long as I have the option to.
And they have the freedom to.
Yes.
I think the way I see things, I think that the work to be done in Palestine after liberation is just as important as the work to be done leading up to liberation, if not more important, in certain aspects. Because we are, maybe this might get a little bit, the scope of this might be a bit more than what we're discussing here, but we're living in a a time of constant change. The political structures around the world are changing, and with the liberation of Palestine, should that happen within our lifetimes, we the Palestinians, especially the younger generations, have the opportunity to build an alternative to what we're seeing around the world today. There is such injustice, whether you're talking about labor exploitation, whether you're talking about resource exploitation, climate injustice, and there needs to be an alternative. And where better to build that alternative than a place where you're literally building from the ground up? I don't see an alternative like that appearing in the West, where the systems have been in place for centuries, and if not, like in the United Kingdom, for almost a millennium. But in a place like Palestine, where inshallah liberation hopefully will happen within our lifetimes, hopefully it's quite near. Obviously we work towards that, we work towards creating justice, but further than that, we also need to work to maintaining justice and creating an alternative, a future in which we can create, for example, a sustainable alternative to what we're seeing around the world, a way of living that doesn't revolve around having GDP growth being the ultimate goal, things like that. So I think there is some room for us.
There's a lot of work that Palestinians need to do after liberation, if liberation is near, and we all hope it is. But there's a lot of work to be done from the inside out, society-wise, cultural-wise. There's so many aspects of it, like politics, like internal politics of Palestinians as well. You go now to the streets, probably half of the people will not identify with any political party that exists. There's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done. But I just think the question that you asked, I view it as someone who observed the answers as a bit unfair, specifically maybe to someone as Sarah, that doesn't identify as a British person. It's unfair to ask someone whether they would go back or not. I mean, everyone expects, anyone from a Palestinian background to be like, oh, yeah, yes, I want, in a heartbeat, I would return. But I think that having the option is the answer, and being able to go back to see what it is and then making a decision should be this is what the answer is. Because you identify as a Palestinian with your background and everything, but you haven't lived there, you don't know the country, and agreed, it might not look like you might not look like it, but obviously you having the option to visit, you having the option to take part in being part of the country, that is what matters, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's very, very true. And I have an issue with discussing the day after all the time. I mean, let's get to the day first. Let's get closer to the day to discuss the day after. That's just, I think discussing the day after all the time makes us forget that we're still not there, by the way.
Yeah. That's a very, very valid point. And on that note, we're going to have to end today. Thank you all for joining us for the lively discussion. And I hope we can have another one at some point.
Hopefully. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.